The morning of her sister's wedding, Eleanor Voss stood at the back of St. Crispin's Church and counted the candles on the altar. She had promised herself she would not count the guests. She had promised herself she would not look at the pew where Lord Ashworth's family sat in their dark coats, arranged like a row of crows along a winter fence. She had promised herself she would not look at the door through which she herself had entered, 6 months prior, on the occasion of a very different understanding, one spoken in her father's study, witnessed by no one, and dismantled with the ease of a letter slipped under a door. So she counted candles. There were 14 of them. The organ swelled. Marianne came down the aisle in ivory silk, her hair dressed with seed pearls, her gloved hands folded over a prayer book she had never in her life read. She was 22 years old, and lovely in the way that required no effort on Marianne's part, and no adjustment to the opinions of those who observed her. The Earl of Ashworth waited at the chancel, a tall figure in blue-gray, and he did not look at his bride. He looked for precisely 3 seconds at Eleanor. She looked back. She could not help it. 6 months of resolution, of careful daily extinction of what she had permitted herself to feel. And still her body betrayed her. A locked stillness in her spine. A warmth that reached her face before she could prevent it. She looked away first. She always looked away first. From the pew directly ahead, she heard Lady Portsmouth lean toward her daughter and murmur, in that pleasant carrying voice particular to women who did not think servants had ears. Poor thing, the plain one. She was supposed to have him, you know, before the sister made her play. Well, there it is. Eleanor pressed her thumb into the spine of her own prayer book until the leather creased. There it was. She had been Eleanor Voss for 24 years, the elder daughter of a Hampshire solicitor who had possessed more learning than money and had passed both conditions to his daughters in equal measure. Her father had died 3 years ago. Her mother had followed him 18 months after. The house in Hampshire was let. Marianne, who had the face that doors opened for, had secured her invitation into the Hertfordshire set through the mechanism of a cousin whose own connections spiraled upward toward Lady Portsmouth, and from there into the season. Eleanor had come along as the necessary chaperone. She had not expected to be noticed. The Earl of Ashworth, Philip Dane, Earl of Ashworth, whose estates at Harwell encompassed 4,000 acres, and a house Eleanor had seen described in 2 separate architectural publications, had noticed her on the 3rd evening of October at a card party at Thornbury Hall, where she had been explaining to the elderly Viscount Metcalfe the correct principle of whist strategy while her sister danced. Lord Ashworth had sat across the card table from Eleanor for 40 minutes and said almost nothing, which she had taken for disinterest and which had turned out, as she understood only afterward, to have been attention. He had watched her explain to Viscount Metcalfe the correct sequencing of the winning hand, watched her set down her cards with the precision of someone who had learned the game not for pleasure, but because her father had believed a mind required useful occupation. And he had said, once, very quietly, that her reasoning was sound. Viscount Metcalfe had not heard him. She had. She had also heard him, near the end of the evening, politely declining an introduction to a Miss Pemberton who had been arrayed by Lady Portsmouth in a confection of gold gauze, and she had told herself that the declining had nothing to do with her, and she had almost believed it. He had called on her father's house twice in November. Both times he had sat with Eleanor in the drawing-room for an hour, while Marianne was visiting. Both times he had left without saying what he had come to say, and both times Eleanor had told herself she had imagined whatever quality of intention seemed to live in the space between his silences. In December, her father's solicitor, old Mr. Ferrars, who had handled the estate since before Eleanor was born, had received a letter of inquiry from Lord Ashworth's steward, regarding the nature and extent of Eleanor's father's property and the question of any outstanding debt. Eleanor knew this because Mr. Ferrars had told her, and because it had the formal character of an opening move. She had allowed herself to understand what it meant. 1 month. 4 weeks of understanding what it meant, of waking in the mornings with a specific warmth in her chest, of reading his name in conversation and not looking up too quickly. The letter came in January. Not to her. To Marianne. She had never asked Marianne about it. Marianne had not volunteered anything. The engagement was announced at the January assembly at Thornbury, and Eleanor had stood next to the punch bowl and heard it with 20 other people, and she had not cried, which she had been proud of at the time and which seemed less heroic now, watching 14 candles on an altar while the organ played. If you have ever been required to watch someone else take possession of a future that was meant to be yours, you will know how Eleanor's hands had learned to lie still in her lap. Stay with her through what comes next. What happens after the ceremony is what matters. The breakfast was held at Thornbury, Lady Portsmouth's estate, since the new Lady Ashworth had no family house adequate to the occasion. Eleanor had been given a task, the seating arrangement for the long table, the coordination of the flowers, because she was capable, and because no one knew what else to do with her, and because giving a woman something to manage was generally understood to be a species of kindness. She was checking the position of the place cards when she became aware that someone was standing 2 feet behind her. She knew before she turned who it was. She had learned, in the preceding months, the particular quality of his stillness, the way a room organized itself differently around his presence, as water adjusts its surface around a stone placed beneath it. "The Carrington party has been seated at the far end," said Lord Ashworth. "Mrs. Carrington is hard of hearing. The musicians are near the far window." Eleanor did not turn around. "I am aware," she said. "The far end puts her near the kitchen door. There will be noise. There will be noise in any case. The alternative arrangement seats her between Colonel Fairfax and your aunt, and both of them are accustomed to being listened to. Mrs. Carrington will do better with a kitchen door than with Colonel Fairfax." A brief silence. "Yes?" he said. "That is correct." She turned then because she could not continue to address a place card in his presence without it being strange. He was watching her with the quality of attention she had spent 7 months training herself to consider incidental. He did not look like a man who had just been married. He looked like a man who was about to say something he had been composing for some time. "Miss Voss," he began. "My lord." She picked up the next card. "The musicians are ready, and the guests are arriving. I believe you are needed at the door." He held her gaze for one long, measured breath. Then he went. That was the first occasion on which Lady Portsmouth's companion, Mrs. Hobart, remarked to the lady's maid within Eleanor's clear hearing that it was a great pity the wrong sister had been got at by a man like Lord Ashworth, because the right one would have managed him better. The lady's maid had laughed. Eleanor had continued to arrange flowers and had not permitted her face to do anything at all. She remained at Thornbury for 3 days after the wedding, which was the duration of Marianne's request, and then she took the coach to London, where she had been offered, through the mechanism of a letter she had written herself in January, a position as a reader companion to Lady Forthright of Cavendish Square. Lady Forthright was 67, slightly deaf, possessed of an income that required no management, and a mind that required a great deal, and had been recommended by Mr. Ferrars as a situation with some dignity to it. Eleanor arrived at Cavendish Square on a Tuesday afternoon, with 1 trunk and a box of her father's books. Lady Forthright met her in the drawing-room, examined her for approximately 40 seconds, and said, You do not seem to be the sort who cries in her room at night." "No, my lady," said Eleanor. "Good. I have had 2 of those. They make the household sad. Come and sit down." Eleanor sat down and did not cry in her room that night, and began the work of rebuilding what she was. The work was not dramatic. It was the kind of work that is done in small daily increments, invisible to anyone who has not been undone, and must therefore know exactly how to undo the undoing. She read aloud to Lady Forthright for 2 hours each morning, from whatever Lady Forthright required, and she had a good reading voice, low and steady, and she did not rush the difficult passages. She sorted Lady Forthright's correspondence and answered what Lady Forthright directed her to answer, and she learned that Lady Forthright's household ran on systems that had once been excellent and had deteriorated since Lady Forthright's previous companion had taken ill, and she quietly restored them, beginning with the household accounts, which she presented to Lady Forthright one Tuesday in a format so clear that the housekeeper, Mrs. Pitton, had come to Eleanor separately and asked with some perplexity how she had known the problem was in the quarter-day records. Eleanor had said she had not known. She had looked until she found it. Mrs. Pitton had gone away and told the rest of the household staff that the new companion was not like the others, a verdict Eleanor would not learn until considerably later. Lady Forthright had, as it turned out, what the season considered an inconvenient habit. She went to things. She attended lectures at the Royal Institution. She went to Almack's on Wednesday evenings, when her knees permitted. She attended the musicales and the card parties and the dinners of a social set considerably more elevated than anything Eleanor's father's connections had reached, and she required Eleanor at her elbow for all of it, since Eleanor could whisper the names of approaching guests and intercept the conversational ambushes of rivals with a speed that Lady Forthright's hearing no longer managed unaided. It was at a Wednesday assembly at Almack's, 6 weeks after the wedding, that Eleanor saw Lord Ashworth again. He was standing near the east wall with 2 other gentlemen, and he was not dancing. He had not yet seen her. She had approximately 90 seconds to arrange her face before the geometry of the room made her position obvious, and she used them. "Lady Forthright," she said, "the Duchess of Harcastle is near the refreshments and appears to require company." "She always appears to require company," said Lady Forthright. "She is deeply boring, and I shall talk to her in a moment. Eleanor, do stop moving us about the room like chess pieces. I know perfectly well that Lord Ashworth is against that wall, and I am curious to see what he does." Eleanor said nothing. "He married the sister," said Lady Forthright, with the serenity of someone delivering a weather report. "The wrong one. I said so at the time. I say so now. Stand still, child." Lord Ashworth crossed the room in the way he did everything, without haste and without apparent effort, as though the 30 feet of polished floor between them were simply the natural distance that preceded wherever he intended to be. "Lady Forthright." He bowed. He looked at Eleanor. "Miss Voss." "My lord," said Eleanor. "I trust you are well." "I trust you are well," he said. And somehow the return of her own sentence carried a weight that hers had not, as though he were asking something her version had only performed. Lady Forthright's fan moved in a slow arc. "She is exceedingly well, as you can observe. She has read me 3 volumes of Gibbon this fortnight and corrected my housekeeper's accounts without being asked. I intend to keep her." "I am glad she is well situated," said Lord Ashworth, and he said it to Eleanor rather than to Lady Forthright, which was technically incorrect as a matter of address, and which Eleanor filed away with the 7 other things she was not going to examine. He was in London. It emerged on the occasion of some parliamentary business. He was in London without Marianne, who had remained at Harwell for the first months of the marriage. He was in London, and he was at Almack's on Wednesday evenings. and on 2 subsequent Wednesday evenings he made his way across whatever room Eleanor happened to be standing in with the same unhurried inevitability. She had not invited it. She had not discouraged it. She had accepted it with the composure of a woman who has learned that the body and the will are not always in agreement, and that the agreement is the responsibility of the will, which meant keeping her hands still and her eyes level and her voice in the register of simple courtesy. It was, she thought, the most exhausting performance she had ever undertaken, and she had spent 2 years performing equanimity at the card tables of people who had not thought to wonder whether she was equanimous. On the 3rd Wednesday, he stood beside her for long enough that Mrs. Hobart, who was, Eleanor discovered, visiting London and who seemed to be everywhere that Eleanor was, remarked to her companion across the room, at a pitch she had surely intended to carry, "There is that pale creature again, Lord Ashworth's sister-in-law. One cannot quite look away from the train wreck of it." Lady Forthright's fan stopped. Lord Ashworth's face did not change. He turned, very slowly, and looked at Mrs. Hobart with the quality of attention he usually spent on Eleanor, except that it had none of warmth to it, and all of rank. Mrs. Hobart's companion took a small step backward. "Mrs. Hobart," he said. His voice was level and clear, and designed to carry precisely as far as her remark had carried. "I believe you are acquainted with my father's solicitor, Mr. Carston. I mention it because Mr. Carston handles matters of reputation as well as matters of estate." The silence that followed had a texture to it. Mrs. Hobart's smile did not quite hold. Eleanor said, quietly, "It is nothing, my lord. It does not require your attention." "It requires exactly what I give it," he said. He said it to Eleanor, in a lower register, and the warmth was back in it. No more, and no less. She looked at the middle distance for a moment. Her hands were still. She had learned, over these weeks, the particular discipline of hands that were not allowed to move toward a thing they wanted, and her hands had become very good at being still. "She is not wrong," Eleanor said, finally, "in the material facts of it." "The material facts," he said, "are not the whole of the matter." He walked away then, because she had turned back to Lady Forthright, which was as much as she permitted herself. Yet the following morning a letter arrived at Cavendish Square, not to Eleanor, properly, but to Lady Forthright, in which Lord Ashworth wrote that he was aware a great wrong had been done, and that he wished, if Lady Forthright would permit it, to speak to Miss Voss privately, at a time and in a setting convenient to her. Lady Forthright read the letter aloud over breakfast. Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate. "I shall permit it," said Lady Forthright. "Tomorrow, in my sitting room, with the door open. I have no intention of being anywhere near the conversation." Eleanor said, "It would not be proper." "My dear child," said Lady Forthright, "propriety is a cage you have been locked inside for 6 months. I am letting you out of it for 1 hour. Do try not to lock yourself back in during the interval." He came at 2 o'clock. She had arranged herself at Lady Forthright's writing table with the appearance of correspondence, which was a small deception she permitted herself because she could not simply sit and wait for him to arrive as though she were at a ball in a gown cut for waiting. She heard him on the stair. She heard the footman's voice, and his in response. She did not look up when the sitting-room door opened. "Miss Voss?" "My lord." She put down her pen. She had not been writing anything. The paper was blank. He sat across from her at a distance that propriety required, and that still, somehow, was not enough distance. He was a large, still man, Philip Dane. And when he was quiet, in a room, the room had a different quality of air to it, a held quality, the way a breath feels in the chest before it is released. I owe you an explanation, he said. You do not, said Eleanor. You owe me nothing. You acted within your rights in every particular. I acted within my rights, he said. That is not the same thing as acting rightly. She looked at her blank paper. Your sister called on me, he said, and he said it with the care of a man who had been composing this for longer than she had realized. In December. She came with your father's solicitor's letter, the inquiry I had made, and she suggested to me that I had formed the wrong impression of the Voss family's situation. She told me that your father had died in considerable debt. She told me the Hampshire house was not let, but sold. She told me you had refused 2 offers of marriage in the preceding year because you did not intend to leave her without support. Eleanor was very still. None of which was true, she said. None of which was true, he agreed. Or rather, the debt existed, but it was modest and was discharged within the year. The house is let. You refused 1 offer from a man your father had told you was a gambler, which I am informed was the correct judgment. And your sister, I discovered later, had formed an attachment to my income several months before I had formed any opinion of either of you. The fire in the grate made a small sound. She will have heard, said Eleanor carefully. Whatever she chose to hear, in the way you looked at me at the card party. Yes, he said, as will anyone who observed it, if they were paying attention. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his face open in a way she had not seen it before. Not the composed public surface, but something behind it. Something tired and undefended. I am not here to excuse myself, he said. I am here because I would like you to understand what I understood, and when. I was misled. I believed what your sister told me, because I had no reason not to believe her, and because she told it well. I did not consider what it would cost you. That is a failure I own without reservation. Eleanor said, You have a wife, my lord? I have a wife, he said. Yes. I intend to be faithful to her. I intend to be decent to her. I do not intend to pretend to you that I am not aware every morning of my life of the specific nature of the error I made, or that the error was not mine to make. The silence stretched. What do you want from this conversation? Eleanor asked. I want you to know, he said simply, that it was not nothing, that you were not, that what I intended toward you was not a passing convenience or a matter of property, that you were seen by me as the person you are, that seeing was real. Eleanor looked at him. She had spent 6 months making sure she did not look at him directly. And now she looked, and it cost her something to find that his face said exactly what his words said, and nothing more complicated. That is a very cruel kindness, she said, and her voice was level. He looked down. Yes, he said. I know. I debated whether to come. Why did you? Because you are living in another woman's house doing work you were not born for. And the reason you are there is a lie your sister told about your circumstances, and I am the reason the lie was worth telling. He raised his eyes. I thought you had a right to know the truth was known. She stood up. He stood up also, because he was that sort of man. Thank you, she said, for coming, for telling me. He took a single step toward her, just one, and then he stopped, and the stopping seemed to cost him more than the step had. If there is ever anything within my power to do, he said, as a matter of correction or address, you have only to say. I know, she said. She looked at the blank sheet on the table. That is the difficulty. He left. She heard him on the stair again, and the door, and then the street below. She sat back down at the writing table and looked at the blank paper for a long time. She thought about what it meant that the truth was exactly as she had half suspected, and no worse and no better. She had spent 6 months constructing a version of events in which she had imagined everything, in which the quality of his attention at the card table had been politeness and nothing more, in which the 2 calls in November had been the ordinary courtesy of a man investigating a potential match and not finding what he sought. The version had been livable. She had lived in it. Now the version was gone, replaced by a more accurate and considerably more painful account, and she had to build something new to live in. And she did not yet know what shape it would take. The blank paper looked back at her. She had not been writing nothing. She had been writing, she understood now, to the version of herself who had woken in January mornings with that particular warmth in her chest, and the letter was simply that she was sorry, that she had let her hope get ahead of what she knew, that she forgave herself for it, which was harder than it sounded, and which she was not yet certain she had accomplished. Lady Forthright appeared in the doorway 10 minutes later, with 2 cups of tea, and sat down in the chair he had just vacated. "Well," she said. "He told me the truth," said Eleanor. Lady Forthright handed her a cup. "Useless thing, the truth, without something to be done with it. What will you do?" "Nothing," said Eleanor. "There is nothing to be done." "There is always something to be done," said Lady Forthright. "The question is whether you have the appetite for it." Eleanor drank her tea. The season turned toward March. The trees in Cavendish Square put out their earliest leaves, pale green and hesitant, and Eleanor continued to read Gibbon and correct accounts, and stand at Lady Forthright's elbow at assemblies and musicales and the card parties of the Hertfordshire set, because Lady Forthright went to things and Eleanor was required to go to them also. At a card party at Grosvenor Square, she encountered Marianne. Marianne had come to London at last, in the 3rd month of her marriage, and she had come in the full equipment of a countess, the gown, the jewels, the manner that had been assuredly Marianne's natural register, and was now underwritten by 4,000 acres. She looked well. She looked, Eleanor thought, like a woman who had got what she wanted and had not yet found out what wanting it had cost. She also looked, when she saw Eleanor across the card room, like a woman calculating. "Nellie," she said warmly, in the way she had always said it, the diminutive Eleanor had outgrown at 15, and which Marianne used when she wanted something. "How well you look. Lady Forthright keeps you busy, I see." "She does," said Eleanor. "You look well also." "Harwell is beautiful," said Marianne. "Philip is, well, he is Philip. You know how he is. Very correct. Very attentive. Not perhaps very—" She tilted her head. "You know how he is." "I know how he is," said Eleanor with perfect neutrality. Marianne's eyes moved over Eleanor's face with the particular attention of someone reading a text she has studied before. "He told me he called on you," she said, "at Cavendish Square in February." "He did. He's very scrupulous about things, about explanations, about— What did he tell you, Nellie?" Eleanor looked at her sister for a long moment. She saw, beneath the diamonds and the composure, the same Marianne she had always known. The Marianne who had, at 8 years old, told their mother it was Eleanor who had broken the china figurine, and who had, at 16, told every girl in the neighborhood that Eleanor's invitation to the Hartley ball had been a mistake. Not malicious in the cartoonish sense, competent, sure of her own survival in a way that absorbed other people's costs without accounting for them. "He told me about the visit you made in December," Eleanor said quietly. "About the solicitor's letter." Something moved in Marianne's face. Something that was not quite guilt and was not quite fear, but lived in the territory between them. It was accurate, Marianne said, substantially. No, said Eleanor. It was not. Marianne's fan opened. You had nothing, she said, and the warmth had left her voice. And what remained was simply Marianne, stripped of performance. You had a modest house let to strangers, and £40 a year, and a name that meant nothing in this set. I had the same name and the same house, and I had 1 season to use them. You would have done nothing with it. You would have talked about Gibbon, and corrected old men's whist strategy, and gone home to Hampshire, and called it dignity. Yes, said Eleanor. That is what I would have done. I wanted more. I know you did. Marianne looked at her. The fan held still. You are angry, she said. I am not angry, said Eleanor, and found it was true. I am clear. Those are different things. She returned to Lady Forthright's side. She did not look back at Marianne. Her hands were still. It was, as it turned out, the clarity that made the difference. In April, a young woman named Miss Grantley arrived at Lady Forthright's Tuesday evening gathering, the smaller, quieter gathering that Lady Forthright held for people she liked, rather than people she was required to acknowledge. Miss Grantley was the niece of Sir Edmund Grantley of Wiltshire, a man who had known Eleanor's father, and she had arrived in London for her debut in a state of absolute terror, which she was managing by asking questions of everyone she encountered. She encountered Eleanor. They were introduced over a plate of sugared almonds, Miss Grantley having retreated to the edge of the gathering with the transparent strategy of someone who hopes that extreme stillness will make them invisible to people who ask about their prospects for the season. Eleanor, who had practiced that particular form of stillness for 24 years and knew exactly what it looked like from the outside, sat down beside her and offered her an almond, and they talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular, which was also how Eleanor had survived rooms like this. And Miss Grantley's shoulders had descended by increments from somewhere near her ears to their natural position. At the door, leaving, Miss Grantley had said, with the plainness of genuine gratitude, that she had not expected to enjoy herself, and Eleanor had said that enjoyment was rarely the point of these things. The point was to get through them without losing anything essential. And Miss Grantley had laughed, which was the first laugh Eleanor had heard in a room like that in some months, and she had felt, in the vicinity of her chest, something that was not quite warmth, but was adjacent to it. 3 weeks later, Sir Edmund called on Lady Forthright to thank her for what Eleanor had done for his niece. He was a trim, precise man of 57, a widower with a serious cast to his face, and 2 grown sons and a library that he mentioned with the reverence Eleanor recognized as affection. He sat across from Eleanor while Lady Forthright pointedly found other rooms to be in, and they talked about her father's library, and then about his, and then about the nature of Regency inheritance law as it applied to entailed estates, which was a subject Eleanor had, for obvious reasons, thought about at some length. He had listened to her with the particular quality of attention that was not patience, which was simply waiting for a woman to finish speaking, but interest, which was following the thought where it went. He had disagreed with her on one point, politely, with a reason, and she had disagreed back, with 2 reasons. And he had looked at her for a moment, and then said that she was correct, and that he had not considered the second point. It was a small thing. It was the kind of small thing that a woman who has been managed and managed around learns to notice the way a sailor notices changes in wind direction, because everything depends on getting the reading right. He had not been managing her. He had been talking to her. She had gone back to her room that evening and sat very still for a long time, not thinking about Lord Ashworth, and had eventually understood that the not thinking was its own kind of thinking. He called again the following Thursday, and again the Thursday after. He called with the deliberateness of a man who knew his own mind and was disinclined to waste time. In May, Lord Ashworth attended a dinner at Sir Robert Kane's house, at which Eleanor was also present, standing in her position beside Lady Forthright, and he watched Sir Edmund Grantley seat himself beside Eleanor at table, and he watched the conversation that followed with an expression Eleanor did not see because she was not looking at Lord Ashworth. But Lady Forthright saw it. Lady Forthright saw everything. On the way home in the carriage, Lady Forthright said, "The Earl is not a happy man." "The Earl," said Eleanor, "made his choice in January." "He did," said Lady Forthright. "He is living with it." "As are we all," said Eleanor. "As are we all." Sir Edmund proposed in June, in Lady Forthright's garden, on a morning when the roses along the south wall had opened overnight, and the air carried the specific warmth of early summer in London, which is softer than the countryside and carries the smoke of the city in it, and is none the less beautiful. He had been telling her about a disputed property matter in his Wiltshire estate, which was the kind of thing he told her about because she had an interest in such matters, and because he had, over the course of 6 weeks, discovered that she was better at following the logical sequence of a legal problem than most men he employed to think about legal problems, and he had stopped mid-sentence about the western boundary fence, and said, with no preparation whatsoever, that he would very much like to marry her, if she would have him. He had said it the way he said everything, plainly and without ornament, and with the additional quality of a man who was not certain of the answer, but was certain the question was right. Eleanor had laughed. She could not have said why, except that the combination of the fence boundary and the proposal and the roses had struck her as being exactly, precisely the shape of a life she had not known she wanted and had apparently been waiting for in the wrong directions. She laughed for a long moment, and then she cried, which she had not done in 7 months, and Sir Edmund had handed her his handkerchief and waited with the patience of a man who understood that there were things being sorted in the crying that had nothing to do with him, and some things that did. She told him the whole of it. She had not intended to, but she found once she had begun that she could not stop. And he listened without interrupting, and then sat quietly for a moment. "You loved him," he said. It was not a question. "I had begun to," she said. "There was not time for more than beginning." "I am not Lord Ashworth," he said. "I am 57 years old, and I read too much, and I cannot dance worth a fig, and I will not pretend I am a romantic figure. What I will tell you is that I see you, not the beginning of you. All of you. And I intend to spend whatever time is given to me making certain you are never again in a position where someone else's choices determine your circumstance." Eleanor looked at the garden. The first roses were out, pale yellow against the warm brick of the garden wall. "You are a very decent man, Sir Edmund," she said. "I am trying," he said. "Will you let me?" The announcement appeared in the Morning Post on a Thursday. Eleanor read it with Lady Forthright at breakfast. "Good," said Lady Forthright. "About time." The wedding was held at St. George's, Hanover Square, on the 23rd of July. It was a small ceremony. Sir Edmund's 2 sons and their wives, Lady Forthright, a scattering of Sir Edmund's Wiltshire connections, and Mr. Ferrers, old and pleased, who had come from Hampshire for the day. Lord and Lady Ashworth were not there. Eleanor had not invited them. Marianne had sent a note in June upon reading the announcement, which Eleanor had answered with 1 line of civil congratulation, and had not otherwise answered. The church had 6 candles. Eleanor counted them once, because she had a habit of counting things, and then she stopped counting, and looked at Sir Edmund waiting at the altar. And she walked toward him with her hands entirely still. And the stillness was not discipline this time. The stillness was simply her, If you have ever felt the particular quiet of arriving somewhere you had given up expecting to reach, you will understand what Eleanor felt as she crossed the nave. Leave a thought below if her story has stayed with you. There was a dinner afterward at Sir Edmund's house in Brook Street, which would shortly be Eleanor's house, and which she walked through as a woman who would return to it. The rooms were full of his books. She touched the spine of a volume of Roman history as she passed the library door and thought of her father, who had owned the same edition. Sir Edmund found her there. "Come and eat something," he said. She smiled. It was not a performance. "In a moment," she said. "I am learning the shelves." He stood beside her and named the sections: the Roman histories, the natural philosophy, the legal texts, a shelf of poetry his wife had gathered, and which he had not moved in 8 years. He said it quietly, without sentimentality, naming the sections as a man names rooms in a house he is giving to someone he trusts. At the end of the summer, when Sir Edmund's sons came to Wiltshire for a fortnight, Eleanor sat in the walled kitchen garden with the elder son's youngest child, a girl of 4 who had acquired a strong opinion about caterpillars and held a glass jar while the caterpillar in question was persuaded inside. Through the garden wall, she could hear the voices of the men on the lawn, Sir Edmund's among them, and the sound was simply the sound of a house in use. She thought of Lord Ashworth, once. It was not a long thought. It was the kind of thought that acknowledges a road not taken, and then returns to the road taken, because the road taken has caterpillars in it, and warm stone walls, and a man inside who had meant what he said. She had been seen. She had not been seen first, and she had not been seen by the most important man in the room. And the season had not overturned its verdict in any ballroom she would ever enter. The seeing had come quietly, in a garden, at 57, by a man with bad knees, and too many books, and a handkerchief ready to hand. It had been enough. The caterpillar achieved the jar. The child crowed with satisfaction. Eleanor set the lid on and held it up to the light, and the afternoon sun came through the glass in a warm amber column, and she felt in her chest the specific quiet of a woman who has stopped waiting and started living in the thing she has. She had been Eleanor Voss. She was Eleanor Grantley. She was in Wiltshire, in a garden in July, and the roses along the kitchen wall were the same soft yellow as the roses she had looked at through Lady Forthright's sitting-room window when Sir Edmund had first asked. She had looked at them then and not known what to say. She knew now. The afternoon held its warmth around her, and the child caught her hand, and somewhere beyond the wall her husband called her name, and Eleanor Grantley stood up and went in. Thank you for staying until the end. If Eleanor's story found its way into you, leave a moment in the comments, your favorite turn, or simply that you were here.